I'm here with Erica, a former nurse at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver, and we're talking about William Arnold Coombes, who died in February 2011, and you were part of the treatment of William. At the time, I guess you didn't know that he had been an eyewitness to the abduction of 10 children by Queen Elizabeth from a residential school in October 1964, and he had gone public and talked about that. He was on the verge of being invited over to England when he died. And so we want to talk a little bit about your experience with William.
No, I wasn't aware of that, but I knew there was something up when I arrived for these constant care shifts, which is basically one-on-one LPN to one patient, which is usually only done if there's like very specific needs with that person. I found out when I arrived that when the CNL came up, she told me that they are identity protected, so I knew that there was something up immediately. The name on the chart was William Coombes, which kind of made me laugh because that's Mr. Dressup's name, but...
It was also the name of his dead brother who died in a residential school.
Yeah, that's what you told me when I first spoke with you, and that's kind of very mean for me to have us call him that. Anyways, so I read the chart, and it said basically the diagnosis was undiagnosed bloodborne infection and ETOH, which is alcoholism. And I went in the room after seeing that he only had one med prescribed to him. That was furosemide or Lasix, which is a fluid shifting med, usually for edema. And went in the room, and he had not eaten his dinner, and I asked him if he was hungry, and he said he had a stomach ache. And then sort of tidied things up in the room, and I watched him get up to go to the bathroom, and his mobility was extremely unstable. I asked him if he was dizzy, and he didn't say anything then, but later on, when he called for me for help getting up from the bathroom, he said the room was spinning, so I knew he was having vertigo and extreme weakness. He couldn't even get up. It was at that time that I saw his skin pallor wasn't right. It was mottled and had raised bumps, something you called hyperkeratosis. He wasn't coughing at all. His urine was dark and smelly, which indicates that there's some sort of toxin in his system.
Was there any
stressed kidneys?
Any indication? They claim his cause of death was disseminated tuberculosis. Was there any indication of tuberculosis when you saw him?
None whatsoever. Like I said, he wasn't coughing, and there was no fever, and his chest sounds were clear when I did the head to toe. Yeah, there was absolutely no sputum, evidence of sputum, anything spat on towels. Sometimes they'll hide it like that, and there was nothing like that. There was nothing in the charts of any previous nurses that had seen any blood in his sputum, which is what you cough up, and any evidence of crepitus in the lungs. That would be like blockage. That's part of the meningitis kind of balls that form and block up the lungs when someone has active TB. He did not have active TB. I did, when I was in the bathroom with him, that's when I saw a Band-Aid on his lower back, and this Band-Aid is exactly where you would have a plaster put on after an LP. And LP is a common test for TB.
LP is lumbar puncture?
Yeah. Be on that little, the skin scratch test, the Manitou test. He didn't have any marks from that either. That's the little 4 prongs. Both of these things are really identifiable. And that led me to go and look through like the full chart and see if there was any tests for TB or things like that that were called for, or even an order for the LP. I did, in that shift, ask the CNO about his undiagnosed bloodborne infection, why he wasn't on an IV, remarked that his blood pressure was low and that he was dizzy and that perhaps he should be, and why isn't there any broad spectrum antibiotics being given to him, given the undiagnosed bloodborne infection. He literally had nothing in him. He was obviously very sick feeling. You know, he seemed pretty quiet and depressed, really.
And when he apparently had some toxic poisoning in his system, he wasn't in isolation of any kind, though.
Yeah, that was the other part. He was in what's called an isolation room. There's 2 or 3 of them at the end of every unit in St. Paul's, and they're pretty, like, you know, coveted rooms for, like, we usually like to spare them for people that are contagious infections. And there was absolutely no contagion protocols in place for myself or any of the other people that came in and or out of that room.
So a lot of anomalies.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that didn't make sense. I did a total of 4 shifts with him. And the CNL, like, she would hear me on my questions about why he doesn't have an IV, he's not drinking or eating well, and no antibiotics. She would hear me on it and she'd tell me she'd get back to me, but she didn't, which was unusual for her. She was a
Okay.
long time experienced.
And then tell us about the meeting you were called into.
Yeah, the CNL came up to me and when I was charting at the end of the midway through the shift, not at the end of the shift. And by the end of the shift, I was to go to a meeting regarding Ernie, William, and she didn't tell me that much about it. I had assumed it was a family meeting. She did come and knock on the door to tell me when they were ready, and she brought me to the little office, and there was 3 chairs with 3 people sitting there, and none of them looked native, none were family. And I sat down. One woman in the room had a St. Paul's badge. The other 2 had no badges whatsoever. I had never seen them before. The 2 men were, you know, middle-aged. One was a Caucasian with very graying hair and a sort of like gaunt, pale skin, as if he'd been under fluorescent lights way too long. And the other fellow was very northern native BC looking, very Asiatic eyes, big bushy eyebrows, thick, wavy, dark hair with graying on the temples. He stared at me intensely the whole meeting. They asked me very pointed questions that were also they didn't fit with a hospital care planning meeting.
Like what questions?
They asked me what he'd been saying. And I had been involved with patients that were under observation for non-consensual admission before, and I think I reacted from fear of I didn't want to answer this question. I asked them why he didn't have an IV and why he wasn't on antibiotics. That was my response, and that's when the native looking man just, you know, what's his mental status? He barked out at me, and I didn't like the look of him. He actually kind of scared me. And I said, I don't know. Why don't you have a psych consult come in?
Why do you think he asked about his mental status?
Well, that's... In Canada, you need 3 doctors to sign off on you to basically be non-consensually admitted to a psych unit or have all your rights taken away, have anything done to you medically.
Including have your life support terminated?
If that's what they did, you could do that. Usually that's reserved for people who don't have any family, but yes, they could do that.
Because in William's case, that's exactly what happened later at VGH. They pulled him off life support without anyone's permission.
Yeah. I don't know what to say about that. The whole thing made me feel like I didn't want to nurse anymore. It felt like we weren't doing our job for this man.
So based on what you saw, some of the other symptoms you saw on him, what do you think, what's your medical opinion about his cause of death?
In hindsight, hyperkeratosis, the dark urine, he had these lines on his nails. They weren't ridged. It looked like the moon of your nail bed went halfway up, and it was a slightly darker singular line right across. Those lines combined with the constant abdominal pains, the dizziness, and and moments of almost delirium that I saw him have. He around the twilight hour, 6 to 7 o'clock, he would almost be talking about like memories as if they were currently happening in the room, and I let him go with it because he's talking to me.
The delirious. What does that all indicate?
And these lines, which are called Mees lines, indicate arsenic poisoning, specifically in combination with the hyperkeratosis, the papules I saw on his skin that at first looked like scratches, but when I looked closer, they were just little bumps.
So in your opinion, is that what he died of?
It could very well be. An undiagnosed bloodborne infection doesn't manifest as Mees lines, and he had no fever and
no TB.
And no TB. And
Even
he was
though
being tested for it, and no antibiotics.
Let me just hand you this. That's the official coroner's report, and it says that he died of disseminated tuberculosis. It doesn't mention that they pulled him off life support.
Tuberculosis is disseminated throughout the blood. Given the widespread nature of the disease, it is unlikely that any head injuries would have caused or contributed to the spread of the disease into the brain. So it was in his brain. Well, this is interesting because they're saying it's throughout his bloodstream. But this doesn't make any sense. Toxicological testing was not necessary. Well, that would have shown what the Mees lines was showing.
So you disagree with the coroner's report?
Oh, absolutely.
Any final thoughts about any of this?
Postmortem cultures confirmed an antemortem diagnosis of TB. We got a lot of TB in medicine, and we knew when there was a TB in the room, whether or not it was active or passive, because there is several different types of TB. There's no way that if they suspected this, but they did, right, because it was a bloodborne infection.
Could you turn to the front to the picture of William and just hold that up? And that's the man you treated?
Yeah, that is definitely the man I treated. That bandana was even in the room.
Thanks, Eric.